Welcome back, folks, to the Get a Grip on Life show. On today's show, we have Shelley Carroll, a municipal councillor in the city of Toronto. She's had an interesting career. She's been in politics a long time, so check this one out. And if you want to create digital media, go to getagripstudios.com, start your own podcast, do your own video blog with us. We'll help you out. We'll take care of all the BS that's involved with it. You just do the recording and interview your guests or whatever it is you want to do. But for right now, Shelley Carroll on the Get a Grip on Life show. Welcome to the Get a Grip on Life podcast, Shelley Carroll.
Thanks, Michael.
You know, this is my ward. I grew up here. I don't live here anymore, but I grew up at Victoria Park and Finch. Lived there till I was 18 or 19 years old.
Fantastic. So represent.
Yeah, represent. Well, it's the wrong side of the Don Valley Parkway, though.
Mm-hmm. Well, some people think that. It's my favorite part.
Is that right? So, you know, it's funny. Growing up in North York, it was kind of more Scarborough feel to it.
Yes, that's the thing. Between Victoria Park and 404, it has that feel. And there's a bit of an allegiance because the kids go back and forth for school.
Yeah, so it had a more of a Scarborough feel to it. So I tell people I grew up in North York, but it was more of a Scarborough upbringing in the 90s and 80s and 90s. So it's an interesting ward. Let me ask you this. I want to start because you probably get asked a lot of questions about local political issues. But one of my concerns is, how do we get people more engaged in local politics? It's because for me, you know, I look at it. If you were to go down the street here and ask people to name a politician, they're going to name one who will remain nameless on this show.
Yes.
Okay. But he has no relevance to their life at all. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know,
it's true. The higher the order of government, the less they have to do with your daily life when you walk out the front door. Mm-hmm. And you're right. Most people can't name their councillor. And that's been really my life's work since becoming a councillor. I knew as soon as I stepped into that file that people were incredibly unengaged in what was happening at a time when they really ought to have been because they just lived through amalgamation.
Sure.
But they still had no connection to it.
Sure.
So that's really been our cause as a team. My staff team and I have always worked on that. I was a school board trustee first.
I mean, trustees are so important. And people don't understand how important they are and how impactful they are in your life.
There's a built-in connection there to a smaller constituency. It's the people whose kids are currently in the system.
Sure.
But those who have ever needed a trustee become incredibly engaged in what they're doing. So to move into the city realm where everyone has an opinion, everyone has a complaint, but they don't really realize that complaint should be a dialogue between yourself and your city representative. So we set about, back in 2003, beginning to rebuild in neighborhoods where there had been a residents association when I was a kid, but it was now gone.
Sure.
Trying to talk to people and say, how about we restart that? And talking to condo boards and saying, you know, you manage your little townhouse complex here or your building. Do you ever talk to the people who live next door to your building?
Sure.
And try to pull them all together. And that work has just sort of progressed until for the last 5 years I've been the participatory budgeting queen, which is the ultimate engagement tool. And so really it should come as no surprise that I'm working on that because I took this very unengaged part of the North York map and tried to make it the center of engagement.
I think a lot of people don't even know what wards they live in. I think they don't.
Oh, yeah. We seldom use the number because it doesn't mean much.
Yeah, Don Valley North, you know, sort of, you know, gives you an idea of geography.
Yeah.
But I think is it a decline? I don't know. I don't remember long enough back to know if voting rates have gone down in local politics. Mm-hmm. Have they?
They have, but especially in North York. North York began the decline sort of ahead of all the rest. Prior to amalgamation, the history of it sort of goes that people were pretty engaged because there was a lot of churn. Mm-hmm. So people were pretty engaged in the elections in Etobicoke and Scarborough, but less so than the City of Toronto. The City of Toronto was a hotbed of politics at the municipal level at that time.
That's the Barbara Hall time. Is that
Yeah. Okay. And even before that, you know, Art Eagleton, and there were some real battles from the David Crombie era on up. But in North York, we had this magical known quantity, Mayor Mel Lastman.
Yeah, sure, Mel.
And so there was very little change in the council map because, you know, you knew Mel was going to get reelected, and I'm generally happy. Whatevs. People tended to not bother to vote municipally, and so Well, overall, municipal election turnout has been going down since about the 70s, throughout Ontario and really throughout North America. That trend really started in North York a little earlier than the rest, because we knew Mel was always going to be there.
But there's something tragic about that in a way. It's a tragedy of the commons, a true tragedy of the commons, in a sense, that people are not engaged in. I think it has something to do the continual reduction in engagement in local politics. And I read an article in The Economist about this a couple of years ago. Is that it's getting worse because people are going into these online worlds.
Yeah.
Which are not reflective of their geographical world.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't have any franchise in those worlds.
That's a very good point. It's a very good point. And so they're sometimes made unhappy by the conversation that's going on there.
Yeah.
But they don't really look at what is going on in their neighborhood, and some of it can be quite positive.
Absolutely.
And they're just not engaged in it. So it's a frustration. And many people talk about how they're disengaged from politics and disappointed in it because the same people keep getting elected over and over and over again. And I have a real appreciation for that. I want to get reelected because you did go to the polls and because I have done a good job.
That's
if I haven't, sure. I want you to have the wherewithal and the level of engagement that you do something about it. Yeah.
So the idea, the idea that one of the things you hear commonly said is, they're all liars.
Yeah.
Or they're all in the same boat, or, the same people are getting elected. And I don't think that's true, and I know it's not true. Actually, I've met several politicians on from the Conservative Party, from the Liberal Party, a couple from the NDP over the course of my life. And I found them to be very engaging, welcoming people, when I live in Uxbridge now. At the time, what was his name? His son runs now. He's on the Conservative side. I'm trying to remember his name. I can't remember it now, but I called him. He called me back.
Yeah.
I spoke to him on the phone. He took my concerns seriously. We were talking about a couple different issues. And I found most of the politicians I've met to be just regular people that are doing, what I think to be, a more difficult job than people think.
Yeah. There are some people in politics, in the GTA, in Toronto, that I'm not happy with, that I disagree with on most things, and that I argue with. There are some people that I know are really just phoning it in. And so I think that's where it comes from. People have had those types of experiences. But if you don't engage even a little bit in it, you don't realize that there are some real champions who really are trying to have your back, whether you're in their ward or not. They're fighting for things. And an example right now, you see Joe Cressy, a downtown councillor, really leading the charge on fighting the cuts to municipal level public health authorities, to the point where he's not just fighting for the people in the downtown core. Prior to this fight, people saw him as the guy who's standing up for safe injection sites, a controversial thing. But it's reached the point now where we're fighting to maintain the ability to have good municipal public health authorities and public health boards across the province. And this is a local councillor leading the charge. The mayor's backing him up. But he's really leading the charge for every health board. And councillors have the ability to do that when they really go to work. Now, how do you say at that point all politicians are lazy liars? You shouldn't say that. Actually, it's a lie. It's wrong and it's insulting to a lot of people. But and I want to do a little bit more. Who's responsible? Like, where do we lay the responsibility for the decline in engagement? Is it the decline? Because local news has also declined. All the local newspapers are pretty much owned by one company now, or by the town. Yeah. And so the ownership, so the Stouffville Free Press, for example. So I live on the border between Stouffville and Uxbridge. So I'm more I guess so, yeah.
I'm more of a Stouffvillian than I am an Uxbridgian, because it's
that's the story of your life then.
Yeah. I'm always on the outside looking in. So I have to vote for Uxbridge, but I'm more concerned about Stouffville in a way because we actually live right on the border of.
Yeah.
We live in Uxbridge Township, but we live right on the border of Stouffville.
Right.
So we live on a farm, but the Stouffville Free Press is owned by the town of Stouffville. I feel like that's a bit of a conflict of interest in a sense.
Yes. Well, it's the opposite of free press.
Yeah. Well, the name is wrong, actually.
Yeah.
They're taking the name and go, and or maybe they bought the paper. Uxbridge has a local paper called the Uxbridge Cosmos, actually, and it's by far the most interesting newspaper in Uxbridge. The other ones are not. They're owned by the councilor or whatever. The two seem to go hand in hand. The decline in local news. And also the decline, maybe in the sense of community in some of these areas. Right.
And so what's happened is, it really just boils down to numbers. It's part of the reason why you see an obsession on the exact number with the property tax. What is the exact decimal point of percentage that might change this year? Because it's really all they're focused on at this point. They're not connecting the dots to what is the experience that I had living in this city this summer? Were there things for me to do with the number you're yelling about in January? There's no real connection between the investment I make in the community that surrounds my biggest investment, my home, and getting what you pay for. Because without local news really talking about what's the vision here, where are we going with this community, what's happening, without that, we're kind of left always struggling to understand, why do I have to pay this bill? We're not really engaged in the conversation. And I think both in the television news media and print media, it first of all led to one company soaking them all up. And then those large media conglomerates saying, we don't want to run these little ones. And so little by little, we get down to people say, oh, gee, why are they always wringing their hands over things in downtown Toronto? Well, they're surrounded by news media that actually does cover what's going on there. It's hard for downtown councillors in the city of Toronto because everyone knows their local ward issues. They don't know their own. Because the media is now so concentrated in Young Dundas Square, really. That's where news emanates from for all of Ontario. There are people who don't read a local paper in the far north of Ontario, but because there's a service, they have the Star delivered up there. And it doesn't really tell them what's going on in their own community.
No, it doesn't.
So the role of media is huge. So whether or not we can count on in generations in the future people moving to this form of news gathering, that they gather it from their favorite podcast. Podcasts can begin to have regional coverage. We hope that happens. And certainly people in print media now are trying to move, can I have a role in that? What is my role in that? We're hoping that sort of saves us, that people begin to see that. But in the absence of that, if you really go out there and look for it, you'll find that politicians are having to do the job themselves. Here's an issue in our neighborhood. Here's how it would affect Don Valley North. I'm going to have to vote on this next week, is something I have to write about myself in a journalistic style every Thursday. Because if I don't, I'm not sure they'll get the news that that's an issue.
The next question would be, and that's in the same vein, this is a very diverse ward.
Yes, one of the most in the city.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and you have the Armenian Community Center, I think, is in your ward. And I just saw your tweet the other day about the Armenian Genocide.
Yes,
that was your tweet. Was it yours? Yeah.
April is commemoration month. And
and the Armenians are very passionate about that. And there's a dispute between Turkey and Armenia about that situation. But I read
and I have Turkish residents.
I read your tweet. And I think it's something that people have. It's an international issue, but all of a sudden it's a local issue too.
Exactly.
That's very difficult to deal with. So my question was how do you get this cross-cultural engagement going? Because you have a Chinese community, you have multiple different Asian communities, Tamils. There's I don't know the full scope of the ward, but very, very diverse, and those people seem to be in little pockets within a pocket. How do you get the conversation going between them to get some common ground on issues?
Well, I'll be honest. To get them talking to each other, we haven't really achieved that yet.
Wow,
that's something we're pushing for. What we do a lot of in Toronto, and there are some with a different political bent than my own on council.
Sure, we're not going to talk politics at all on this show. We'll get to it.
Who fight this, but most of us, thankfully, the majority, and certainly the mayor, including Rob Ford. Once you get to the mayor's office and you've been through a mayoral campaign, a light bulb seems to go on that you have to touch each of those communities. And so we actually actively fund. If they want to develop community organizations, community service organizations, we have a really robust community grant program to make sure that they're able to do it. We seed the organization of them and nurture them along, because it allows us to communicate with them and get them the message, what services are available to their community, get them engaged in what changes may happen in their neighborhood. But the big challenge is to get them to begin to talk to each other. And I have to be honest, I don't think we're there yet. That's the final frontier.
It's interesting because I travel a lot to the States for business, and you go to, let's say Minneapolis or Des Moines or Nashville, and they talk about diversity. They have no idea about diversity until they come to the city of Toronto. Like, seriously, I think even New York may be second to Toronto in terms of, pure cultural, massive amounts of different kinds of people in the city of Toronto. And on that note, I have another. We can go in a million different directions here, but I think that's the key to leadership in the 21st century in cities.
Yeah.
Toronto can do that, actually. It's one of the most diverse cities in the world, for sure. I mean, London, it would be like probably Toronto, London, New York would be those three cities that are super diverse. I mean, Sao Paulo or Mexico City, those would be a lot more ethnically homogeneous than the city of Toronto. I mean, you got people from everywhere in Toronto. You can find every type of cuisine. I'm not going to say every, but many, many different kinds of cuisine. How can Toronto really develop a policy of cross-cultural engagement from a higher level? Is it a provincial issue or is it a city issue? It
needs to be a city issue. Actions like that, really achieving engagement, is really best done by the order of government that's closest to the ground, and that's municipalities, no question about it. But we need the other governments to partner in it. If they partner in it, they get to take advantage of it from time to time when they need to reach those communities. But right now, we're essentially doing most of that investment in that ourselves. It tends to be in places in smaller communities. Say a settlement community is being dropped in a smaller town. The federal government gets more involved in it, but they really rely on us. They fund settlement workers that work on making sure that when new communities move into Toronto, the kids settle well in school. And so they do fund settlement workers that work sort of in a school-based way, but making sure that they build their own celebration of their culture within ours, because that's important. A lot of people say, why don't these people assimilate? If they're going to be strong, happy families, and the kids are going to grow up in a really, healthy way, both physically and mentally, and really still feel connected to their parents and their grandparents, you have to not only help them learn about Canada, but allow them and actually facilitate them being able to continue their home culture as well. And we do most of that investment ourselves. A lot of volunteer work happens within each of those cultural communities, and they raise their own funds. As soon as you become successful, the Armenian community is a good example. As they became more successful in the community of Toronto, they built that community center. They built that church and 5 others to make sure that their kids would still continue to embrace the culture that they originate from. And that just makes your family healthier. We have in Woodbine Junior High School, there are 38 classes of Mandarin-speaking kids there every Saturday.
Yeah.
And the kids, by the time they get to grade 4, I got to go to Mandarin school. They're moaning about it. But that's the key to them maintaining their connection to mom and dad and grandma and grandpa. And if they don't, they're not going to be our most constructive citizen.
Not only that, though, but I think it's also very valuable for Canada to have Canadian citizens that speak Mandarin.
Yeah.
It's good because when you're in trade negotiations, you can bring people to the table. No, seriously, like if
Well,
you have
I
I
have a fluent Mandarin speaking niece who looks like me. She's a tall blonde.
There you go.
But she thought, if I did want to ever work in finance, is French going to be the best language for
No,
me,
not
or
really.
Mandarin? In Vancouver, the reason she speaks fluent Mandarin is in Vancouver, they have Mandarin immersion in as many schools as French immersion. And she took all the way to international baccalaureate and went on to do her education at UBC in Mandarin. So, that's the real connection. Now you have someone living in a community who has a connection to her own culture. Her father has Polish heritage, but she now has a connection to a major other culture in her neighborhood. There's no boundary between her and her friends who may have only lived in Canada, in the city of Vancouver for 4 or 5 years. That's something I've actually pushed for. We had an attempt at that in the city of Toronto, and we had in the past. Prior to amalgamation, something that a previous provincial government cut was we used to have a heritage language program mostly in the downtown core of Toronto, but North York had just started it, where there were 16 different languages that you could learn during the school day in various schools. You could optionally attend in. And so there were English kids learning Mandarin. There were Chinese kids learning German. There was, it was seen as, instead of a gifted program, let's just add this extra challenge and our kids can all be more cosmopolitan. And it was having a great effect. Shutting that down, we've been looking ever since. It shut down in 1998. And ever since then, we've been looking for a way to replace that.
There's language learning, multiple language learning has benefits for in a whole host of different areas, including brain development.
And the earlier, the better.
Exactly.
If you're waiting till high school to do it, good luck.
Yeah, it's tougher.
Yeah.
Or when you're 41. So I wanted to ask you a little bit. This came up and popped in my head, and when I was thinking about interviewing you last night, Toronto versus Ontario. Do you remember when Mel Lastman came out and said, hey, Toronto's really a province. I don't know how long ago that was, but I thought, well, that's ridiculous, whatever. But it seems to make more and more sense to me. Now it's like if you looked at the top politicians in Canada, I mean, the mayor of Toronto is not going to be that far down the list.
Exactly. The mayor actually has to garner more votes to become mayor than the prime minister. The prime minister, once he's had his leadership convention in the election, he just has to win in his riding.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. That's a great point.
Yeah. Whereas the mayor has to go out there and try and find himself 300,000 votes.
And not only that, but roughly, not only that.
Yeah.
Think about it this way too. You think about like Nova Scotia is probably economically smaller than Brampton and Mississauga.
Yeah.
Or, never even mind the city of Toronto. It's not even close.
The way I try and describe it to people, because numbers sort of just swirl around in our head. And so what I do is turn the numbers into pictures. Toronto is larger than the city of Montreal by the entire size of Vancouver.
Right. That's a great way to put it.
So we're that far away from having a peer in our country.
Well, that's the next point of it. This hierarchical relationship between Queen's Park and City Hall seems to be a little anachronistic to me. It seems like it's almost two equals.
Yeah.
The mayor, and it's not that way though, but the mayor of the city of Toronto is probably equal, or in some ways in terms of maybe the city of Toronto has a larger GDP than the rest of Ontario combined. It's possible. I don't know what the numbers would be, but
now there's a model in between becoming our own province, and this is not something that I push on a regular basis, but it's a model that I'm aware of. My thing, because I'm a numbers person, is figuring out the revenue tool equation, but if you wanted to look at it as a governance model, in Germany, years ago, when I went to Berlin, I was sent there to go to an event, and I got there, and at that point, the Berlin Wall had only been down for 15 years.
Okay.
And they had a tremendous amount to do, because when the wall came down, on the other side of it was a mess.
Sure, of course.
And people sort of celebrated the wall and then left them alone to their own devices.
Yep.
But they showed us all the ways in which they'd restored it. We spent a week touring it all the things that they had to do in just 15 years. I said, how could you we can't do this in 15 years. We've been stumbling around with our waterfront in Toronto for 15 years.
Yes, sure.
We're nowhere near there at this point because it was only 2005. And what they said is, well, when you're a city-state, you don't have to check with anybody. You just do this. The German model of city-state, it's not that they're a province. There is still a sort of a provincial model, and they partner with those. But basically what city-state means is not only are there property tax, but the income tax gathered in this city stay in this city. And that gives the national government the ability to say, you're on your own. I'm going to fund all the rest. But you, big city, you have your own economy and your own pool. Use it, fix yourself. And they did.
Yeah, sure.
And much faster.
And
and so you ask yourself, we gather so much income tax in the city of Toronto, and we keep such a tiny fraction of it. Former Premier Dalton McGuinty used to talk about this all the time. We send $23 billion in income tax out of the province every year, and they throw 6 back at us. What if you said, we don't want to whinge and whine anymore, and we don't want to build your transit anymore, and we don't want to fix the mouth of the Don. Just you keep your income and take care of yourself.
Well, I mean, the idea that
then people would really engage in municipal government.
it would be interesting to see what would change. You know what I'm going to throw you a real wild card. Because I think the key to engagement and the key to fixing a lot of our current problems, and this is just something I may have heard somewhere else. I'm not going to say it's my idea, but it just occurred to me that I might want to ask you this question because I think it's an interesting municipal issue, but it has to come from the federal government. But I think it would make a big difference. I think people should have to register with their driver's license or passport in order to open a social media account. I'm serious.
That would really change things. I would love if we could remove the anonymity from social media. I would love that.
I think people could still remain anonymous to the outside world, but there is some, when you're talking about, Big Brother, I don't think so. I think there's a lot of irresponsible nonsense that happens because you don't, I'm going to go after Shelley Carroll.
Yeah.
But, who are you?
Exactly. So when they go crazy, we can shut down the account, but it sometimes ventures into the criminal, and there's not a lot anyone can do other than get the platform they're on to remove them.
Yeah.
But, some pretty frightening stuff happens.
Sure. So, I mean, it seems to me, and then you wouldn't have 13-year-olds on Instagram and these things, we've shown that. And then also you'd know where people live. So the state could say, or Canada or Toronto could say, well, if you're in Toronto, your newsfeed, Facebook or Twitter or Instagram has to reflect a certain amount of local news for where that person lives in that ward. And I think it would solve a lot of problems for in municipal politics that way.
I suspect that at some point we're going to go through a revolution in terms of social media.
We're not already in one?
Well, the revolution of starting it up, but we're now at the height of all of its drawbacks.
I totally agree with that. We
haven't really found the solutions to that yet. And I think we're going to reach a generation where enough kids have had a terrible experience with it and start to have the kind of terrible experiences that people of note have on it. I'm not going to leave it, but I've been targeted and
sure, of course you have.
Terrible things happen.
And nasty, cowardly, hiding behind a Twitter handle. Yeah. It's disgusting.
But I think people are going to come around to it. There's a special on Netflix right now by Ricky Gervais, Humanity, where he gets into talking about this and saying that, people have they've lost the idea that there's a context to everything. They surf social media platforms just to look for things that offend me and then say I'm offended, and that's their whole reason for being there. If that's become your central method of finding enjoyment, then what's happening in your life and what's this doing to your mind?
Well, people are able to indulge the worst parts of their natural, I don't know what the word is, physiology or natural mindset. Like the search for victimhood is one of them. I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like I want to figure out how I'm a victim now of something. And Shelley Carroll's my problem, actually.
Yeah.
It's all her fault. And I'm going to tweet at her from behind my cell phone on the bus because whatever.
Exactly.
It's ridiculous in some ways, and just ignore it. But it's like, well, why? I think what's going to happen. I think there's one of two things is going to happen. So I do a lot of Google Hangouts. I do a podcast where people are up on the screen there, and I'm talking to them like that.
Yeah.
It's a virtual studio, so we can bring 8 people in virtually. And then I
don't know if I was looking at them. Maybe that's what needs to happen.
Well, no, so I think we're going to go to the
take away
virtual.
the egg and have faces.
Yeah, so what's going to happen is you're going to, like I've introduced so many people. So if you have a Gmail address, Skype is complicated sometimes. Calling people on Skype. Calling people over Google Hangouts on a video call is very easy. You just click it and you're in.
I'm heading back to the office to do this right now.
Yeah, I mean, I did it this morning 3 times with people, and it was of all 3 people, it was 2 of their first times ever doing that.
Wow.
And I said, look, I don't have time to drive to your office and go over this proposal and, and then talk to each other and burn all the fossil fuels and wreck my car and spend the time and all the different things that are involved in moving me around the world. There's all sorts of different consequences. My time, there's a bunch of things. Why don't you just click that little thing that says Google Hangouts right there, and then I'll see you and you'll see me and we can share screens.
Yeah.
And it's 95% of what it is. And pretty soon we'll just grab the screen and I'll open up and I'll walk into your room like a hologram. Who knows? I think that's part of the solution as well as a further development of this technology.
That may be the way I get to the point where I can properly execute this job. Our new double-size ward, the biggest complaint with people is you keep telling me to make an appointment. I'm welcome to come and see you, but man, oh man, it's hard to get an appointment with you, and it is.
Sure.
Yeah. I've gotten to the point now where I'm tremendously relieved if there's a committee meeting, because it means, I'm going to get to stick to one topic for a couple of hours.
There you go.
The rest of the time, you're just going 20 minutes, half an hour, person to person.
That's exhausting, actually.
And at the end of the day, you think, who did I talk to at the beginning of this?
Yeah, for sure.
We're lucky we have staff sitting there making the notes and making sure that the follow-up will happen, but it's just a constant assault of deal with this issue.
You're almost like a king at court in a way. I hate to put it that. I mean, obviously, you're not, but
because we're the minutia government. Yeah, we deal with the crack in your sidewalk.
There's potholes in my street. Yeah.
You got to deal with this pothole or this. It's ponding right over here, and you have to deal with. What are we going to do about that sidewalk labs project and a massive innovative change?
Renovation.
So it's everything from the hugest to the smallest, and all in one day, every day. And then on the weekend, race around and try and connect with your constituents
and then
in person.
And then be the budget chief.
Yes, and then balance the books while you're at it. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that. That's a monster budget. Like, how do you even start looking at it?
It is, and it's it was more difficult when I was doing it because we had not yet worked out a lot of the post amalgamation issues.
Okay.
So we have a little more to work with now. That was the main assignment during the 4 years that I was the budget chief. Is there was much more conversation going on with the province while we were balancing our own books. We were still, and this is 2006 to 2010, we were still sorting out the issues of they downloaded all the services and it was clearly a mistake. It's one thing to say, it's kind of like Brexit. It's one thing to say it's a mistake, but uploading them back up was a very complicated process. So that was all going on within it. So we were sort of setting the table for the tools that are there to balance the budget now. So it was a real handful. During that 4 years, really myself and everyone in the budget committee and the mayor's staff member who was our right-hand man, each of us got seriously ill at some point in the four-year process. Because we were all just midnight oil, night
both
after
ends,
night.
Both ends.
At one point, the budget that we had to balance in the year during which the global financial crisis happened was very tricky because the big crash happened in October, and the week later, we would have to release the launch of the budget that would later be adopted in January. So the crash happens. You don't really know the impact yet, but you better leave a cushion to deal with how many people will be unemployed 4 months from now. So we literally, for 72 hours, we were just working. Wow. Nobody went home. We all slept in our offices for a couple hours here and there. The men all grew beards. and we figured it out and kind of rewrote what we've been working on for 4 months to fit more cushion in, $12 to $15 million in a very tight budget. and some extra, job services and extra caseworkers because we knew what was coming.
And nobody wants their budget cut.
No. The hardest thing for a budget chief, the worst part of it is your own best friends.
Yeah.
Because they assume they're all going to get taken care of. So you hide in your office because as soon as you go out the door, there's a counselor. Can I talk to you about these steps down a hill in my ward?
Yeah, for sure.
Surely you can fit it in because you and I get along real well, right?
Then we went out for dinner last week. Don't you remember that? That's
tough. And so, and you end up having to be, the result is you end up having to be toughest on your best friends. To prove that you're being fair-minded, you actually are Dr. No to the closest people to you.
I think that it's interesting that you mentioned that because I find that that's what people think is the opposite of what's happening, where it's like the impression is that it's buddies taking care of buddies, especially in the city of Toronto. There's like this perception that there's a bunch of cliques down there at City Hall and stuff.
Well, that's definitely true, but I have to say, once you get into a real leadership role, with very few exceptions, once you are, taken out of just the pure politics and sitting down with the public service, once you're sitting there with the CFO and the city manager and all the analysts, you start to realize how important it is that you do try and approach this with a level of fairness. You've got to balance the mayor's mandate against the needs that the councillors are bringing forward and the needs that staff are bringing forward. And those really have to be met first because council has already through the year said to those staff members, here's the level of service I expect from you. And so the first thing you got to listen to is that staff member telling you what that will take. And so while you might think, oh God, why is he budget chief? Who knows what will happen while he's doing it? He's that guy's friend, not my friend. I take solace, whomever is budget chief, from the fact that when they sit down with the public service, things really do get real.
So you're saying the politics goes out the window a little bit?
Oh yeah. When you go up to the 7th floor and you sit down in a boardroom with the CFO and all the analysts, and they start to tell you, here's where this department is. Here's where we need them to get 5 years from now. Here's what council has told you they want. Here's what the mayor has told you they want. The path is pretty clear, budget chief. And you end up telling them, okay, I see what you've done here. My job is to tell you that's not going to politically fly.
Okay.
Where else have you got some efficiencies? Because the way you've chosen to fund this thing that needs to happen 5 years from now, that's not going to fly in the council chamber in any clique or corner or faction.
You're not going to get it passed.
So it's not going through. You need to go back to the drawing board, guys. There must be some efficiencies somewhere else. So you're pulling them to look closer. Come on, guys. And you end up doing that no matter what your political stance is when you first take the job of budget chief.
This is what happens to a lot of politicians that have stars in their eyes, and they get, like you hear about Syriza in Greece or these different political parties around the world that that are maybe tipping towards the right side or the left side in terms of they actually end up in the job, and it's like, oh shit.
Yes.
So we actually have to make real decisions now. We can't just talk about stuff. We're so tough and we're going to make everything into a paradise. There's real decisions to make now.
Exactly. And
Brexit's another example of that.
Exactly. They got so caught up in let's make this happen that they started to say, we just need them to say, yes, we'll leave. Be careful not to tell them the impacts. And then you pay for that for the next 20 years. When you take a whole population down one road and get them to want something, then later on when you have to deal with the realities, the engineering realities, the funding realities, Brexit, Scarborough Subway,
sure.
Like these are things where a frenzy of let's all just get this then gets people painted into a corner where they can't turn around and say it looks like this isn't doable.
Yeah, they can't step back.
And that's why engagement...
It's the brinkmanship.
Yeah.
It's the brinkmanship.
That's why engagement is so important to me. If
you.
People really know, if you really give them the opportunity to understand the issue, that's why I use participatory budgeting. They end up doing a whole bunch of interaction to understand the idea I had. Here's why it costs what it costs, how long it will take, and and whether or not the staff think it's viable. They learn all of that before they say, I want my idea on the ballot. And so they really know going in what they're doing. And that takes the politics out of the vote. The vote becomes, what is the best thing to do in this part of the city?
Yeah.
And they make amazing decisions. And it shows you, in a way, what you've done is created this little petri dish in an area where you're doing the PB process.
So do you insulate them
you're
from...
making informed voters.
So you're kind of insulating them from the politics, in a sense, allowing them to bring decisions to you,
Yeah.
and saying, okay, guys, you know what, if I'm, we need to be a little bit more over here, or something else has to change because we can't do it that way. You're kind of insulating those people from politics, in a sense.
This is not my idea. You're not going to decide this based on whether you like Shelley or not.
Yeah.
Because they're your ideas.
That's not relevant to this situation.
And so we put your ideas all on the table, as many as you have. Now let's find out how viable they are from a staff member, not a politician. Sure. And let's find out the real details. They end up learning how a city works, why things cost what they cost, why they take as long as they take.
Sure.
They know a ton more about the public sector. And then they make a reasoned decision, and they're always incredibly fair. People don't vote for the thing that's closest to their house. By the end of the process, they vote for the idea that makes the most sense to the overall area. I've done this 4 years in a row, and they always make the best decisions. They really do, yeah.
Tell me about the Sunrise Propane Explosion.
Oh, my goodness. When I was acting mayor.
Yeah.
Yes. That was an opportunity to see the public service at its best.
Really?
It really was. A lot of people some people have forgotten about it because it was handled so well.
It's almost like you think about what actually happened. It was like a World War II bombing thing happened or something. Yeah.
We evacuated 15,000 people in a couple of hours, held them somewhere, and then staged letting them go back. It after having done a neighborhood-wide asbestos cleanup. They did an amazing job, but it was at the outset. It was a comedy of errors. There was the tragedy first. When it happened, I was mayor by virtue of the fact that I was budget chief, and the mayor and the deputy mayor had not had a conversation. Both Mayor Miller and Deputy Mayor Pantaloni were on vacation at the same time. So just before they left, the staff member called me and he said, "You're not going anywhere in August, are you?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Can you be mayor for 10 days?" And I said, "Sure. Do I get to wear the chain of office?"
Yeah. And get some pictures.
We joked about what I'd like to do if any councillors came in to ask for anything. Could I put on the chain of office and tell them to go to hell?
Could it be called your worship? Is it your worship?
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
Your worship, yeah.
We laughed about those sorts of things, thinking it would never come to anything. Nothing ever happens in August.
Yeah, sure.
And in fact, during those 10 days, my husband and I, just to get a break, we do staycations sometimes. We go downtown, stay in a hotel, and walk around and shop and bike ride, stuff like that.
Sure.
So we did that. And I actually turned my phone off the night before in a restaurant and forgot to turn it back on. So when I woke up at 6 a.m, because my phone was bouncing across the desk.
Oh, my goodness.
So for the first 2 hours after the blast happened at about 3:30 in the morning, they didn't have a mayor. But the public service assembled anyway. They had, at that time, Joe Penichetti was just about to become the city manager. He was covering for city manager Shirley Hoy. So he got to the war room, assembled the...
Baptism of fire there.
Yeah. It was amazing. Got all his deputy city managers together and the chiefs of all the first responder teams. And because it was August, many of them were the second in commands. I walked in and I said, well, in media, they called us the B string. We're a bunch of B stringers. I'm C string. But they did it anyway. And dealt with it. Other orders of government wanted to descend on it, and my role was mostly keeping them out. There's too much work to do. You don't get to come here and make a political party out of this.
Yes, sure.
The room's in a lockdown. We got to get this done. And they were arguing about that right up until about 2 p.m, where tragically a firefighter lost his life. And it was a weird thing. He was rushing so quickly, literally jumping over back fences through a block, trying to check, making sure that there were no more people there, evaluating where asbestos was, and they needed a really quick evaluation before they could sign off on some of the people coming home that night. and went into a heart attack. Now, Bob was probably getting symptoms, but he just desperately wanted to get this job done and help get people back to where they needed to be, and so had a heart attack and passed away in the backyard. At that moment, other orders of government stopped bugging me on my cell phone. When can we come and stand there with our staff and say, "Aren't you doing a wonderful job?" I said, things are very real now, and we have a tragedy to deal with. We're not gonna speak to the media until 5:00 this evening, and we'll give them a whole picture. We're hoping that what we're also announcing then is that a lot of the people who are sitting in Yorkdale Mall right now can go home. This is where malls become community infrastructure.
Yeah, for sure.
when there's an evacuation,
Cadillac Fairview,
when there's a power failure,
yeah, sure.
they have generators.
Sure.
They have to because of the size and the amount of food in them, and so we see them as community infrastructure.
Yeah.
And so thankfully, we were able to say that some people could go home by the time we were having that announcement. But the whole next week was about cleaning up some of the closer aftermath. The Mayor Miller was in a very difficult situation. He was in a very remote fishing camp place out on Vancouver Island, and they got to him right away, notified him. But we didn't know initially how bad it was going to be and if we had to broaden the evacuation. So they said, we need you to get down to Victoria, but don't get on the plane yet. Because in 2008,
yeah.
At that time, phones on the plane weren't all that great yet. So they said, we want you to sit in a studio. In case you need to speak to the City of Toronto, we're going to have you sitting in a studio.
Okay,
so you can speak to Toronto right now. But don't get on a plane where we can't get you when we need you. And so, I wasn't going to be relieved of this until, he didn't get back in until midnight. We waited until we got the first move of people back. And then he came into town. And then went back again once things were okay. So I then went back to the role, and the biggest thing for me was realizing how lucky we were that more people weren't hurt.
For sure.
I toured a city facility that sits just on Downsview Air Base beyond it, where some of the shards from the propane plant went through windows and into offices where aerospace guys from Downsview and city workers, because we have some facilities there, would have been decapitated at their desks if it was daytime.
Thank
Thank
God for that.
We were so lucky. So lucky when you consider how close the residents lived to that plant, and the only person that died at the blast was
just
the poor
one guy,
young,
right?
the poor young guy. He shouldn't have been alone on that plant for one thing, but he was the only
Working
life
alone
lost
is
that
a big,
night.
it's one of those things. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was a close-up look at what can happen to any mayor without having actually had to run for mayor.
So you got a taste baptism by fire.
Yeah.
I often, it was funny, we were talking about this on the lighting show a while ago. We're talking about, there's a vacuum of leadership. And I do think there is a vacuum of leadership in the international and the national level in multiple countries right now, particularly England. I mean, Britain would be an example of a vacuum of leadership where you look at it and you think, oh my God, who's in charge there? Like, what's going on? They don't understand the stakes of that. Or maybe they do understand the stakes of that game, but they care more about politics or whatever. But I think the reality is that good leadership you don't notice.
Well, that is good leadership.
Yeah.
The good
The lights are
leadership is,
on.
I don't need my name on it. I need this done.
Oh no, but the lights are on.
Yeah.
Like
The tap.
that's a miracle
Yeah.
that we have electricity everywhere all the time, most of the time.
The water comes into your house. The garbage goes out.
Yeah.
And in policy responsible ways, it's a miracle.
Yeah, it really is a miracle. Like I remember when we had I can't remember what it was, a couple months ago, there was a power outage, big storm, and everything happened. And one of I own an electrical contracting, so one of the phases went out here.
Oh,
right,
yeah.
and everything was going nuts. All the computers, because the electricity wasn't balanced properly.
Yeah.
And next morning we come in, everything's working.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, that's a miracle.
Yeah. Somewhere out there, a whole bunch of people
In the snow, in the
worked
sleet,
until
all
it was
night long?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they worked until it was done, and somebody actually managed that whole process.
Respect to the power workers. There you go.
Yeah,
They fix us up. Back the next day, we're up and running. All the lights are on. All my audio video equipment's working. All the computers are working.
Yeah.
And people take that for granted, I think. And it takes a real obvious tragedy or something like the explosion for people to get out of their world and say, wow, that's good leadership. Second thing is, I think that, and this goes into the Toronto Police Services Board. I think it dovetails well. I think that the Toronto Police gets lumped in with a lot of police services in North America that maybe have a bad reputation. And I think that I think that that's a bit of it's sad for me because I think there's so many good police officers and in the city of Toronto, and I think it's run very well. And you were on the Toronto Police Services Board for a while. What was your experience like there?
Well, it was tough because we do have amazing officers, but at the same time, we do have our problems, and it's really hard to take the people who do, I mean, these guys, most of their work is not crime fighting. Most of their work is the really difficult stuff that none of us wants to do. Dealing with people who are in the most desperate points in their lives.
Of course.
And because it has to be dealt with right now, it's the police you call. Chief Saunders likes to say that they are the mental health first responder.
It's a good point.
And
yeah,
shouldn't
it's a great
be.
point.
And so they deal with stuff that the rest of us just don't want to ever come
EMS
anywhere
is another
near.
one too.
Yeah. And so they struggle. But they do have huge room for improvement because they reach out for their training around North America and sometimes into Europe. They sometimes pick up practices like carding was a big issue the whole time I was on the board. And that's a practice that was learned and picked up in other jurisdictions.
I think it's from New York City. Bill Bratton started carding in New York. Yeah.
And the way we were doing it was wrong and needed to be changed. And it's hard to say to guys who've
There's
been
a lot of
doing
dispute
it so
about
long,
that, though.
They think they need it. That
even Mark Saunders was in favor of carding, though, was he not?
He is in favor of the way they are allowed to do it now.
Okay, so they've changed the process?
No one disputes that police officers need to know what's going on and who's doing it. No one disputes that. But they are the guardians of your rights as much as they are the guardians of your safety. And so to say to them, it's fine to stop and talk and have a conversation with someone, but he has to know what is the nature of this conversation? What are my rights in this conversation? And if you do need to take his information, he has a right to have a copy of what you've taken.
For sure.
Because it finds its way into the system. So he needs to know what is finding its way into the system about me. And so we now have a policy that says, sure, you can have an informal conversation. It can be not investigating a specific crime, but he has to know his rights, that I'm not investigating a specific crime. So if you wanted to not share with me, you don't have to, but it will help me if you do, and you'll get this T300 form that tells you exactly what I wrote down. That's they can do that now, anytime they like.
And you think that's a much better process?
Absolutely. Rights and receipts. And to me, what's a shame is that we don't just call the policy that. Rights and receipts is what's
instead of carding.
The law now, provincially, instead of carding. Carding was, I'm talking to you, I'm an officer, I'm demanding,
Let me see your driver's license.
Demanding your information right now, and I'm just going to put it in my pocket, see you later. So a kid can't go home and say, I had to give information to a police officer and it didn't feel right, Mom. And Mom can't walk into the division and say, I want to know what you wrote down about my son. That's wrong.
I agree with that.
Basically, that was the old form of carding. Now we know what's been written down. You have a receipt of it. And we also have a policy that says where it's stored, where it can't be stored, who has access to it, and who cannot have access to it. So police can still do their jobs, but now it's got a policy wrapped around it.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
More transparency in policing is always better.
That took 3 years of work.
Wow.
Because it's really hard when you're dealing with people who really do difficult work all day long and saying, I'm sorry, we need to criticize you and we need to change something. That was very hard. But I needed to do it. I did it I have grandchildren of color. I was focused not on, am I going to be in the news tonight if I solve the carding issue? I was worried about those kids' future and all of their friends. We have to break this chain and start doing this in a way that feels like human rights. And that's all. Yeah.
That's a great explanation. Tell me a little bit about the Toronto Transit Commission. You have experience with that board as well.
We're having fun there right now. We don't really know who we are anymore. The TTC is an emotional thing in the city of Toronto,
It really
isn't
is,
it?
yeah.
For so long, we were the subway city, and no one else had any other kind of rail transit or anything. We had the streetcars and the subways, and beyond that, we were a nation of buses. So it built up this mystique around it, the burgundy jacket.
Yeah.
And that's still there in Toronto, despite the fact that Canada is becoming a much more mobility-focused nation. Major transit systems in Calgary and Edmonton and Vancouver and so on. So we have people to compare to in terms of that. But no one carries the passengers we carry. No one has to deal with 550 million rides a year.
Wow.
It's kind of like my other comparison. We carry more riders here than Montreal and Vancouver combined. It's like that.
Yep.
And so we have a big thing to do. And basically we've been fighting for decades now to just go back to a formula that worked from 1974 to 1995. And it's that simple. We just need to go back to where we have a partner in the province for the day-to-day operation. And we have a partner in both the province and the federal government in the constant expansion. The regional system that we know, but no matter what party is in government, the federal government wants this, and the provincial government wants this. The economic engine of the nation needs to be as mobile as any European city region.
Absolutely.
But the one thing they won't do is go back to the formula that Premier Bill Davis used for almost 20 years to great success. At a time that he was expanding, he had a guiding principle that there's no point in expanding this transit system if the existing system falls apart while we're doing it and the riders buy cars. And so let's make a deal, folks. I'll expand the subway lines and start to build a plan for the next 50 years. But you got to be my partner in running this system. It's the economic engine of the nation, our lifeblood. And so they did. The fare box paid for 50%. And the other 50% of the day-to-day operation was split evenly between the province and the city. It's one thing to say to us, here's several $1 billion, buy some new streetcars, buy some subway cars, and the other governments do that now. But property tax can't be the main funder to put the driver on the bus to drive it around.
Sure.
To operate
It's got to be all three levels of government working on it, for sure.
But thus far, they've only liked to buy us toys or buy us new lines, which is capital.
They like to tell you what to do with the money?
And they ask us to detail design. So we have some of the best in the business in TTC. If you go to other cities and ask them about the TTC, they know all about us. They know our people by name because transit is a global community. Got good people, but then the province wants to redesign it. We want to do another thing. Thank you for designing that, but I'm going to do this. A lot of back in the napkin changes happen from election to election. And so there's something to be learned from that process that Premier Davis put in place, because it lived a little beyond him.
I think you need that city-state model you were talking about.
Yeah, and then you start to do planning, as you need to with transit that's 20, 50 years long, and you make a commitment as a community.
The life cycle of these things is incredibly long, actually, We
need to get back to a point where a community says, I'm not going to vote for a guy who says he's going to upend plans we've spent money on. Right now we have a political community where no one's ever 100% happy with the design. So right now people are using political capital to convince people that plan is wrong. Vote for me and I'll change it.
Yeah.
And no one says to them, vote for me and I'll throw away $300 million.
Yeah, for sure.
That's already gone into
for
it.
Sure.
But that's what they're really saying.
That happens a lot, actually.
Yeah. And we need to get people to say, I'm going to vote for the guy that won't do that.
Can you believe we've been speaking over an hour?
Oh my gosh.
Okay, so I want to ask you, so I have to get to I wanted to talk to you about ward consolidation.
Oh, sure.
But I can't because I want to ask you. I know you have to leave at 12:20. I have a feeling this part of the conversation might go a little bit longer. Where's the Liberal Party at now in the province and in federally? I think it's alienated a lot of people.
Well, we know we have to rebuild. We may have seemed very quiet for the last few months, but a lot of that has been about real self-examination and debriefing.
You've alienated a lot of, and especially in the province of Ontario. There's a lot of people that have been alienated from the Liberal Party now. They look at it and they there's just a bad gut reaction.
And really it is sort of gut reaction stuff. But when you start to talk to them about, are you okay that free tuition grants are gone now? No, not okay. My son is screwed now. What's happening? Well, you rejected that. You voted against that. You knew that was going to disappear. That was part of Doug's platform, and now it's gone. Pharmacare is disappearing. Yeah, because you voted for that. So people are starting to realize, wait a minute, what was it I hated again? I know I hated my hydro bill. I'm not sure about the other stuff.
But the Liberals are responsible for the hydro bill.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Like the Green Energy Act, I know a lot about that.
And that's one of the reasons why we've had to do some self-examination.
Like the Green Energy Act was supposed to proposed to lower hydro bills, and it actually increased them significantly.
Yeah.
Like you go from a $30 hydro bill in 2003, it's now $150.
Mm-hmm. But it's still cheaper than many other jurisdictions.
Well, so I mean, not Quebec, not Michigan.
To me, the real mistake was not being genuine about its ability to cut your costs, because it was the way the energy sector is going. It was never going to be the thing that would actually massively reduce costs. In some areas where there were problems that were causing it to go up, it was going to level them off. It was going to reduce a little bit, but I don't think they were genuine enough about where the energy sector really is. And we have to do this not just about cost. The Green Energy Act was about a whole host of other things. And by not being genuine about what you were introducing and then making some mistakes in how they used it, they ended up with a problem out of control. And
the unintended consequences,
I think they thought people
blew up in their face.
Yeah, and I think they thought over time people would just adjust. There wasn't enough communication about it. There wasn't enough addressing of the issues until it was too late. When they brought it down 25% and people's bills went down, in Toronto, of course, that was a boon because they hadn't gone up that much in the first place. In the outer regions, 25% wasn't enough for the level of anger and disappointment. And they thought just introducing other platform pieces was going to outweigh that. So that was not a good strategy. And they've had to sit down and really list their mistakes. Where did we lose touch? And I was with Michael Cotto in a meeting recently in Don Valley North. He was at our AGM, and he said, we're talking to people now and saying, just talk to me about us. You don't have to describe Kathleen Wynne. Kathleen Wynne is not the leader of the party. What about Liberals? And people will say, Liberals are this, Liberals are that. And he's had to hear that as a sitting member and realize, I got to own that. I was part of that distance.
Yeah.
That developed over time. Guilty as charged. Mm-hmm. Now, what are we going to do about it? And we're just now heading into it's why they're going to have an annual general meeting in June out in Mississauga, and they're gathering the party together because they've spent months and months now really looking at how did we get so out of touch? Why are we in this situation where we don't even have party status in Queen's Park? And what are we going to do about it? Because we really still think the general principle of liberalism is very much needed and is possibly a better option than just having a massive pendulum swing from what is a very conservative government to what would be an extremely left. But who are we? We first of all need to listen to our members, and we got to have this AGM and make sure that they've been
you need
heard.
to listen to more than your members.
Well, that's where I'm going. We first need to make sure that we've listened to our members, and that's what this AGM is about. But then we've got to spend 2 long years really listening to every Ontarian.
Yeah, sure.
I can put people in Toronto before them to listen to them about things like that. I have a role now as a councillor, but I'm not tearing up my Liberal card. I'm a Lester B. Pearson Liberal. I go back that far. My grandfather worked for Lester B. Pearson. The original principles, I think, need to be restored and married to the modern reality of people living in Ontario.
But what I see from my perspective is the Liberals vacating the central ground and getting sucked to the left a little, in my opinion.
I don't know about that. Free tuition, that wasn't being sucked to the left. That is desperately needed. It's desperately needed.
I think there might be too many people taking useless liberal arts degrees, to be honest with you. And I don't mean to say I'm one of them.
That's not where most of them ended up, though. Most of them were ending up in Seneca College and Humber College.
I'm happy with vocational training. Yeah. Yes, I think that's much more useful.
Because the grant was small, and so people weren't using it to get a. Well, I can't even use the word that my father-in-law used to use, because he used to teach a BFA, and he had a different meaning for the term Bachelor of FA. Yeah. And most of them were heading to work colleges because the size of the grant was such that made the most sense. You still have student debt, but it took $7,000 off the table, which meant you could get through a number of the education and training courses.
I'm going to push back a little bit on that. I'm not sure that the colleges are doing as good a job as maybe people think. I hire a lot of college grads here, and I think businesses do a much better job at training people with actual skills that they can use in industry.
Oh, I don't disagree that they need to do more apprenticeship and co-op.
Yes, apprenticeships are
forms of education.
Yes.
And the colleges they'll tell you that it's difficult to find those partners. I don't know if they're looking hard enough. I think they're a step behind. It's smaller businesses that are doing the innovation and exciting things right now. We know that in our economic development department in the city. It's SMEs, small and medium enterprises, are really bringing those people in and really teaching them what they need to know.
Real skills that they can use.
But big colleges tend to go out to the big employer first.
Yes.
They need to start looking at what is the real field of business growth and how do we apprentice in there.
I'll tell you this, there's a college real close to me. Right over here, and I've called them many times. I don't know what the department's called, but I can't even get in someone on the phone on their. I can't even talk to anybody. They're about we'll post a job on their job board, and we don't get any applicants.
Yeah. They have become massive themselves, and we have to do that. I have just, as a result of the doubling size of the wards, I've been looking across the street at Seneca College for a long time. Now it's in my ward. So I've been to see them once, been to see some of the stuff they're doing, their ideas incubator, their First Nations study hall, which is amazing. But we have to have more of a connection between them and the things that we do in the city, because we can sort of connect them to a small enterprise like this. But people come in and use our concierge service to get any startup going. So the colleges, rather than saying we're based on who's on our board, we're going to reach out to the employers they know, should be coming in and saying, who should we be talking to?
So or who's close geographically to us? Who's geographically close? Because if you're going to Seneca College, maybe you're staying in residence, but most likely you're busing distance. Like most of the people that are riding public transit, you're busing distance. There's businesses all in the area here. Why not become very close to the local business infrastructure around you?
I always say to parents, because we have in high school fairs, parents will say, he can't be a firefighter. I had, when I was a trustee, a woman called me. She was outraged because I was at a job fair where her son became very excited about being a firefighter.
What's wrong with being a firefighter?
She wanted him to be a lawyer. And I said, is it that you need to say he's a lawyer, or do you just want to say your son has done very well for himself, owns a house and has a wonderful family?
Sure.
Because there are a lot of professions that can lead to
Yeah,
that
for
lifestyle, and he doesn't have to be a doctor or a lawyer to get there.
And being a firefighter, there's a lot and within
I want him to
policing.
be passionate about whatever he does, and he's right now he's passionate about being a firefighter.
Sure, and then being a firefighter, there's a lot of different career paths within being a firefighter.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, a lot of people don't realize, like policing, there's a ton of different career paths in policing.
Well, it's like politics. I'm forever asked to speak to young women, but we need women in politics. Yeah, but you won't all be the politician.
Oh, there you go.
There need to be policy wonks. There need to be communications gurus. There are a tremendous number of roles, and the public service that's behind us actually all get paid more than me. So if you want to serve the public, fine. The politician isn't the only way to serve the public and feel like you're doing that.
And you know, the fame of being the politician is also a burden. Like a lot of people are attracted to fame. They think, oh, wouldn't it be great if I was on TV? Be careful what you wish for.
Not so much. Not so much. You then get to the point where you'd just like to go to Loblaws without makeup on. It's not possible.
Or get hate mail on your Twitter or whatever it is that you get.
It's
Shelley.
pretty tough. Yeah.
Shelley Carroll, thank you for coming in. I think you got to go. It's past 12:20.
Thank you so much.
I can't believe it was almost over an hour and 20 minutes we were together.
It flew by.
It
flew
did.
by.
I really enjoyed speaking with you. Thank you very much.
You bet. Thanks, Michael.
Yep.
Yeah.
GetAGripStudios.com. That's a good place to go if you want to create your own podcast, or you want to do some digital media. You want to create some videos for your business or whatever. We got it all going on. Go to GetAGripStudios.com. And Shelley, thank you for coming on the show. I really enjoyed speaking with you. Definitely passionate about politics in the city of Toronto. Municipal politics, interesting issue. Got to get involved. Municipal matters more, but people don't seem to take it that seriously. Who cares who the president of the United States is if you're in Canada? Who cares who the president is if you're in America? Your local politicians are far more impact your life far more than presidents and prime ministers and all the high-end stuff. But we seem to be so stuck on who's at the top when really your local matters more. Thank you, Shelley Carroll, for coming on the show, and all you listening out there, if you're listening right now and you want to follow Shelley Carroll, her Twitter's on the website. So go to the website, check it out. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.